Hi everybody, my name is Maria Carmo and I'm talking today from Lovelace Academy, and today we have two amazing guests, that's Lars and Keith from Lovelace Academy. How are you doing, guys? How are you, Lars?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Great to have you here. How are you doing, Keith?
Yeah, great. I'm actually in Hamburg at the moment, so living a bit of a digital nomad life. I'm sure, Lars, you've probably been here.
Yes, I have. Not often, but yes. Very nice city.
It's a great little city. Yeah.
Yes.
So Lars, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. See all your Twitters and everything you're doing for the Plutus Pioneer and everything you do about education. Do you mind telling me what you think about education? Do you think is a key for change the world we see it?
Yes, definitely. I think there's very few things that are more important than education. And I think education is the key to like really bringing change and improving the world. So it's very important to me.
What do you think, Keith? Since we start our journey in Lovelace Academy, did the education grow into you?
Oh, of course. Yeah, it's I mean, I think the great thing is we're all of the same mindset that this is absolutely like a crucial element that we need, especially in the context of getting the world onboarded with the concept of blockchain technology. And with Lars, you know, you've done a fantastic job with the Plutus Pioneers program. I guess my current question is, you know, given that's your current your deliverable within your role in IOHK, are there any other larger scoped, you know, big initiatives that you're rolling out soon?
Yes, there will be a course in a similar format on Atala Prism. So this identity system that, for example, the Ethiopian Ministry of Education is using. So that is planned, but we don't have specific dates yet because right now the Plutus course is more important.
And is it going to follow a similar format?
Yes, that's the idea, because it seems to work very well with the Plutus Pioneers. So this combination of like recorded lectures and live Q&A sessions and Discord, and so yes.
Shweta couldn't be here today, but she loves your work and sent us some questions. And the first question would be, what is the plan for developers who have a completely Plutus Pioneer program? Is there something else that you should follow up? Any other program that will come in the future?
I mean, of course, there will be other IOG technologies, as I said, Atala Prism, for example, so it would certainly make sense for them. And we will also have other ways to do smart contracts on Cardano via sidechains with the KEVM or Yali, for example. So that would certainly also make sense. And of course, we are constantly rolling out new technologies. So I'm sure there's plenty to learn for everyone after this Plutus course.
Are you learning it all the time as well as you go along, teaching and involved in all these programs? Because there's a lot, there's many new things.
Oh yes. I'm constantly learning every week, actually, because every week my old code is not working anymore and I have to upgrade it. And yeah, because Plutus is still changing rapidly, so I permanently have to adapt. Yes, but I enjoy learning very much, so that's fine. And getting paid for it, I mean, doing that as your job, that's great.
What's the plan to launch Yali to support universal interoperability?
Yes, I just mentioned Yali. So Yali is built with the so-called K framework, so it's formally verified, and it's another virtual machine, different to the EVM. It's it's based on like different theoretical principles, and it addresses a lot of the shortcomings of the EVM, like these arithmetic underflows and overflows that people on Ethereum always have to be very careful about. So it's like a virtual machine with security and formal verification built in mind, But I mean, actually, you should look at it more like a passport, because it's just an intermediate language, and it will be possible to compile all sorts of languages to the Yali. I mean, Solidity, but also Glow, and probably basically everything you can think, like Python or C++ or whatever. So that's the idea eventually, that basically everybody is included and can write smart contracts on Cardano going via this Yali path.
I think that's the big rollout that everyone's kind of looking forward to, you know, based on the whole island, ocean, and pond concept that Charles mentioned last year even. But it's like being, you know, having people that are JavaScript developers, like really popular languages that are able to write in what they've, you know, learned over the last couple of years themselves, and then build smart contracts with it. I think that's one of the key things, for at least in my opinion, for getting mass adoption.
Right.
I don't know.
Yes.
Does any other language, Keith, help you to get involved with all these languages, like you are doing it every single day? Did any of your knowledge that you have today help you to go through the Plutus Pioneer?
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. It's so I came from a very much a .NET E background, so C#, with F# as well, but the F# it definitely helped, at least with my learning of Haskell. But obviously Haskell has a lot more, I wouldn't say constraints, but a lot more unique properties, which make it also powerful, more powerful. But it's definitely a lot more to get my head around in that respect. So I think from a functional mindset, having Haskell experience definitely helps with, at least with the current rollout of smart contracts in Cardano.
I know that loads of video gonna come up in the subject of Plutus and etc. Lars, would you have a tip or a book or something that you like, that would like to say to the public, look, this book is very good for you to start with?
I could, of course, recommend my own Plutus book, but that is outdated. Unfortunately, we must update that as soon as we have time. No, but for learning Haskell, I always recommend this Learn You a Haskell for Great Good. It's this thin book, and it's very nice. It's very lighthearted somehow. I mean, it's a fun read, and I think it's a nice introduction to Haskell. So I tend to recommend that for somebody that wants to get started with Haskell. It's called Learn You a Haskell for Great Good, and it's also freely available online.
Yeah, so I guess it would be trying to speak on behalf of other developers. So in the case of, as you mentioned, Plutus is still an evolving language. Is there any timeline on when there's going to be like a very distinct 1.0, or it's like a stable like LTS kind of version, and then what's the plan after that to promote the progression or the evolution of that language?
I'm not familiar with the details, but obviously once the hard fork happens, there must be like a well-defined version 1.0. I'm not completely sure how soon that will evolve. Probably in the beginning relatively fast still, because there's still like things to do. But I don't know exactly when these intervals will become slower. But I mean, of course, it will always be backwards compatible. So once we have the hard fork, then obviously contracts you write now must still be able to work in 10 years or so. But it will still develop.
I'm not a programmer. I'm a normal person in the streets, but I think you are the two guys that could answer my question. What is the main difference between Solidity and the language we are talking here? And would we have easy adoption from the developers that are developing Solidity to developing Cardano language? Because people talk about this all the time, but I don't have all the knowledge that you have to answer this question. So I'm learning here with you as well.
I mean, there are basically three things mixed in this, I think, in this question. I mean, first of all, there's the blockchain. I mean, Ethereum versus Cardano, and they work on completely different principles. I mean, Ethereum is this account-based thing where like a massive blob of state, and every contract invocation can change the state. That's the one thing. Then we have the virtual machine. That's basically the bare metal language that higher level languages like Solidity get compiled to. And then we have the language itself, like Solidity. And so somehow this is all mixed up. I mean, for example, there are problems with this intermediate language, this EVM. As I mentioned before, there are these arithmetic overflows, so it can only handle numbers of a certain size, and then you always have to be very careful if you multiply two numbers that you must check that they are not too big, because if the result would be too big, then bad things can happen if you're not careful. So so that's one thing. I mean, that's not directly the blockchain, it's just a virtual machine. And then, of course, you have the language, and you have this whole, as I said, account-based model. And I mean, Cardano works completely different with this UtxO model, which takes some time getting used to, unfortunately. So it's not as intuitive, but it has a lot of advantages, like theoretical advantages, or also practical advantages, because it makes it much easier to reason about your contracts and to see what they can do and what they can't do. So something like this re-entry DAO hack, for example, is basically impossible on the Cardano blockchain. Because you can't have these far-reaching consequences. And Haskell is somehow more suited to this model of the blockchain than something like Solidity would be, because Haskell also has this immutable data structures and so on, which fits very nicely with the accounting model of Cardano. So yeah, there are all these things mixed up. I think it's definitely, I mean, we can't, I mean, we shouldn't, I mean, we should admit that it is indeed quite difficult for somebody that has never done Haskell to switch from Solidity to Haskell. I think it's definitely worth it, because it opens the mind, because if you have this completely new programming paradigm and model, and just knowing about that and thinking that somehow broadens your horizon, even if you then go back being an Ethereum developer. I think, I mean, that's like a mind-altering experience to have this different perspective. But of course, it's effort, and it's maybe not for everyone. But as we said before, we will have the possibility to just do Solidity and still write smart contracts for Cardano. So you are not forced to learn Plutos.
Yeah, it's definitely agree there. It's on the topic of expanding the developer's mind, because you know, going through the experience of even just pure functional programming, you get so many mind-blown moments. You go, oh, okay, it all makes perfect sense, and then yeah, it just makes you a better developer overall, in my opinion.
Yes.
Cool. So the next questions from Shweta is, do you have any tips or suggestions for stake pool operators with the launch of Goguen? Would there be any changes that they need to do in their pools?
As far as I know, there are no changes that they need to do. I mean, obviously they must upgrade the node then to the newest version, but I mean, that's nothing new. I think there's nothing they need to do. However, there are lots of new opportunities, I believe, because Plutus also enables you to, or you can also influence staking, or I mean, staking and Plutus play nicely together. So you can, for example, have a script address, a Plutus smart contract that holds some funds, and that can delegate to a stake pool. And you can also somehow use Plutus script to determine what happens to the rewards. So, I mean, there are now suddenly opportunities for stake pool operators that then don't just write on their website, we give so and so much to charity. They can basically use Plutus to enforce things like that, or do all sorts of things, I don't know, like lotteries or some schemes. So I think it will be much more interesting, and they have new opportunities, but they don't need to do anything as far as I know.
Sure. So this is from the context of that transition from Plutus as a, like something that's very academically understood, and programmed against mock chains and whatnot, and this transition to something that's used in the real world through the Plutus pioneers and the partners and so on. Did you discover any kind of interesting emergent kind of use cases that you saw people using that you didn't expect, I guess, at least from the academic kind of analysis side?
Well, that's a very good question. I try to think whether there was something. I can't think of a specific example now. It's just that it's interesting what people are interested in. So for example, these topics that unfortunately I don't cover in my course because you can't really try them out yet, that I mentioned before, the interaction with Plutos and staking and so on. I mean, people are really interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of, I mean, people can't wait to do things like that, to do interesting things with Plutos and staking and rewards.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, as I said, in the mock chain, that's not supported yet. Staking is not modeled. So I didn't play with it, or I didn't mention it in the course because I feel you can only teach something if you actually can try it out. So yeah, there are things like that and topics that people are very interested in. Also concurrency, for example, that people always ask about throughput and how that would scale and so on. Yes, but yeah, I don't know a specific example now, some use case that we never thought of before, but I'm sure there will be plenty. People are very creative.
Yeah, I guess when given some constraints, people usually end up with some very creative solutions. I guess if I may touch upon that the topic of concurrency and you know the fact that we've got a you know the blockchain that allows us to have only like very discrete periods of state transition, you know, once every 20 seconds on average and so on. Have you discovered anything? First of all, I guess you mentioned that you're working on something that would allow, improvements to the concurrency and kind of the state management side of things. Is there any kind of timelines or any kind of you know, places of documentation where we can start kind of looking at that? And second point is, yeah, like, have you seen any interesting existing solutions that people have thought of, like maybe modeling the problem domain set in a very distinct way, which would allow us to have better throughput?
As for timelines, I'm not too sure, but I mean, one of the promising ideas to make throughput or concurrency much better is Hydra, which is somewhat analog to Bitcoin Lightning, this off-chain protocol where you can handle transactions off-chain, and the main blockchain is just used to like make sure that nobody cheats. And that is coming, but I know there are already prototypes, but I don't know exactly when it will be released. So that makes everything like orders of magnitudes faster. As for solutions, well, my very first example in my very first lecture, in the first iteration, also in the second iteration, was this auction. And that has this problem that if the auction is very popular, basically there can only be one bid per block, so every 20 seconds. And there people were discussing that, pioneers, and they came up with a solution. So in that specific case, the solution was to basically have 10 auction contracts, and then you can bid any one of them, or actually you basically in your transaction, you submit like 10 transactions, but only one of them will succeed at most, but basically you increase your chances of getting through tenfold. And this 10, of course, is just an example. You could also do 100 auctions. And then in the end, it gets a bit more complicated, because then in the end, basically each of these copies has its own highest bidder. And then in the end, you somehow have to consolidate them. Right, but that's possible. So there are certainly ways to solve this. It's just a matter of getting the right idea and finding the right way. But there I was very pleased that basically the students themselves came up with something to make that better.
Yeah, that was definitely interesting to hear. Okay, I guess if I can ask one more question, which was around the new kind of your plan to get more developers on board. Is it simply just referring them to the Plutus Pioneer program with they follow the exact same material, or would there be other kind of more formal trainings, like, because I've seen the Emergo courses, for example, that are kind of paid and quite a bit more intense with the guidance from someone.
I mean, as far as we are concerned at IOHK, our courses are always free, and that's also important to us that everything is open source, and because we believe education should be available to everyone. I mean, if you say exact same material, of course, it will be updated. So actually the second iteration now for me is almost as much work as the first was, because I mean, I have to update all the code and re-record the videos because so much has changed to the first iteration. And of course, there will be a third and probably a fourth iteration, always following the newest developments in Plutos. Eventually, the goal is to have some sort of like Udemy course or so, once Plutos is stable enough. But I think even then, we will still keep some elements of this interactivity, like live Q&A sessions, because I think that's very important. I mean, ideally, I would like to teach in a classroom, but of course, that doesn't scale very well. So we try to keep it as interactive as possible in spite of the large amount of students. So we will definitely continue with that. And of course, if Emergo or other companies or institutions offer courses, that can of course happen. Is not, I mean, we have no influence on that. But we also collaborate with universities, and almost every week I get contacted from some university that asks whether they can have our material and so on. So I hope that sooner or later, probably there will also be universities that teach Plutos. Yeah, so hopefully that will then also help to scale and reach more developers.
Okay, and I guess finally is how can the community help you just fulfill that vision of, you know, getting everyone really just well educated in the sense of learning Plutus, learning bits about Atala? Is there any kind of community driven things that you can think of that, you know, we can somehow help you with?
I mean, that was one of the nicest things of the course for me personally, to see how great the community was already in the first iteration and now as well. So there are already all sorts of things that they did, like somebody, for example, transcribed all my lectures and turned them into a web page with diagrams. And then there's this community wiki. So for example, now in the second iteration, I always use this HADOC documentation. And the way I got that to work was just looking at this community wiki, because there it's a very nice article how to set up a local HADOC server for Plutos and so on. So there's already lots of stuff that people do, and there are like companion videos to my lectures where somebody explains my lectures in his own words, and so all sorts of things. But I mean, ideally, of course, people would like run, I mean, in their hometowns or so, do Plutos meetups or Plutos workshops, or maybe teach their own courses, something like that, if you really wanted to, I mean, want to democratize it and scale it. So maybe we will see that. But already I'm, as I said, very pleased what people do and how much material they already produce around the course.
That's our plan, at least. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
So Lars, would you like to address anyone in the community, Keith or Lars, people that have been help you and doing whatever you do? I know, Keith, you have been in contact with people that have been helping you along with Lovelace Academy. Would you like to address anyone?
I mean, it's just the entire community has been super helpful. Like, I like the fact that we have expanded our the Stack Overflow bits around Cardano, where everyone can really ask questions from a technical level. Discord has been very, very useful as well. And everyone's super nice. I think it's one of the great things about Cardano that generally it's very much a helpful, kind, and intelligent community where people will go out of their way to help you. So I mean, there's too many names really for me to single out. Yeah, that's really my answer there.
So Lars, thank you very much to have this conversation with us. It's very important for us in Lovelace Academy to have you to explain all these bits. And I hope to see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Lars.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Keith.